Hi friends, Mindy here. I have a process video for day 8 of Walk This Way from Bythewell4God. This is the journal that I made that I'm working with and the devotional. I'm just flipping to day 8 here and I'm going to get started. I'm not doing anything spectacular or new today, but I just thought I'd turn on the camera and bring you all along. So I think I did this actually in my last video, but I'm going to just use some Distress Oxide inks and kind of create a smushed ink background. I'm using Stormy Sky and Spun Sugar, and so I just have a piece of acetate over here on the side, and I am putting the Distress ink on there and looking for my water bottle so I can spray some water on there and get that ink to start moving. And because of the paper that I'm using, I just want to spray the paper also with water. It just helps the ink to be able to move a little bit freer. So I'm just going around. I started with a light color because it's just easier if you do it that way. So just spraying a little bit of water to get some of that ink moving. It just works a little bit better on a page that's already a little bit damp. So at least with this particular paper. Anyway, so I'm going to dry that, and you can see I'm pulling out my mats that I have here because I have a really old heating tool and it gets really hot. So if you leave the mats in there, it can cause the mats to warp, and they don't like that. So anyway, just fair warning. That's why in between here I'm pulling the mats out and drying the page, and then now I'm coming in with the color Stormy Sky, and I love this color. It's like it's a really nice blue, but it has a purple tone to it, which is really beautiful. It's one of my favorite Distress Oxide colors. But anyway, just dabbing up some extra ink, and then I'm going to come in here and dry it again, and then I'm just going to keep layering these colors until I get the look that I am going for. So I'm coming in with a second layer here, kind of filling in some of the gaps, places where I don't like it, and adding some layering over top. If you are using Distress Oxide inks and the layers are dry, you can kind of layer them over the top of each other. So that's just what I'm doing here. And then I'll do the same thing with Distress Oxide in the Stormy Sky. Again, I'm just going through drying between each layer that I'm putting on. And now I'm going to take one more time, but some more of this Spun Sugar, and I just added some water to it, and now I'm using a paintbrush or water brush, and I'm just adding little speckles across, and you can't really see it in the camera, especially with the Spun Sugar color, but just adding some little extra interest in the background. And I'm going to do that with both colors. It shows up a little bit more with the Stormy Sky color, at least in the camera. But anyway, in real life you can see it obviously. So I'm just adding some little speckles everywhere and all over my desktop, but that's okay. And then I'm just gonna clean off this little acetate and put it to the side. And now after I get this dry, I've looked at some paper that I thought I was going to use, and so I'm trying to coordinate with that paper. So I wanted to just kind of soften some of the edges of these blends, and so I'm going in and I just, with the makeup brush, went through and just kind of smoothed out some of the areas, just trying to knock off some of the hard edges. And I did that with both colors. And this is the paper that I thought I was going to use. I was planning to use, but I was having a hard time with the colors really matching. So I pulled out this one. This has more of the blue color, but it's not an exact match either. So I'm just sort of contemplating. I left this part in because this is just part of the process. It's not always easygoing. You can see the finger tapping is me thinking, trying to figure out what I'm going to do next. And I'm looking at this background, trying to pull out some papers that may work, but again, that pink has just too much of a red tone to it, and this one isn't really working for me either. So what I decided to do is I just feel like the colors are just a little bit more intense than I really wanted them. So I'm going to create a wash with some gesso, and I've done this before. Just a little bit of gesso over here on another sheet of acetate, and then I'm gonna spray some water on there just to create a wash. And I am gonna just dry brush this wash just over the whole entire page. And the difference that it makes kind of on camera especially is really subtle, but it really did help kind of tone everything down and bring it together. You just have to be careful when you're doing this because obviously distress oxide inks are water reactive, so you can start smearing the colors around if you're not careful. But my layers were really dry when I did this, and I'm using a dry paintbrush, and I'm not applying too much of the gesso, and I'm not reworking the area, but it just kind of helped knock that back some. And now I just want to create some more interest in the background. So I'm using this stamp that came in the kit. It's just a background stamp with a bunch of different words, and I don't want it to be really, really dark, so I'm using my archival black ink, but I'm stamping off first before I actually bring it to the paper. So you can hardly see really in the video. It's just kind of adding some interest in the background, but you'll see I'm stamping it off over here on this scrap paper, and then I'm just going in and in different directions and all over, and I'm not re-inking in between here. I'm just stamping with different parts of the stamp. I'm not pushing the whole stamp down. I'm just really making it trying very random. And at this point I decided I needed to create another wash, and I was almost out of gesso. Like my bottle was pretty much empty. So what I'm showing you here is kind of a trick. I just added some water to my bottle, and I'm just shaking it up really well. And then I wrote on the bottle that I created a wash. So now I won't have to do that every time. Just one of those tricks. I do that with acrylic paint if you want. It works with any paint that you want to kind of have a more liquid or translucent color. You can just, if you have a bottle that's almost empty, you can make a wash out of the little bit of paint that's in there. So that's what I did with the gesso. So now I have a bottle of gesso that's really just a whitewash that I can use anytime. So that's just a little trick to keep your supplies working for you. So anyway, this is the paper that I decided to use, which is this kind of wood grain pattern paper that was in the kit, or in the pattern paper set that you could get from Bythewell4God. But this is the last one that I have. The paper pad comes with 3 sheets each of the designs, but I've already used 2 of them because I really love this paper. So I'm just taking this one, and I cut it in half, and then I'll just use half of it on each side. I'm just tearing. I thought about just keeping it straight across, but I just like the interest that it makes, and I was going to keep it at that like 4-inch height, but I just wanted more of that background showing, so I just trimmed it down a little bit. And I'm just tearing, and the direction that you tear determines whether or not you'll have that white ridge across the top of the paper, which I did not want on this particular page. So I just made sure that I tore the paper that way, and I'm just adding adhesive and lining that up, and then I'm just trimming off the excess here. And I only put adhesive on the 3 sides so that if I want to use this later as a pocket, I can. At this point, it wasn't my intention to use it as a pocket, but just I was keeping my options open. So now I'm going to create the title. Each day that I'm doing, I'm putting the name of the person that we're studying. And so here I'm using the Miriam, I think it's small, alpha. They released a set of alphas that you could get a bold or the regular or the smaller size, and this is the smallest of the 3 sizes. And I am just stamping the word Daniel, that's who we're studying today, and I use that same distress ink, the distressed oxide ink. And I love this little skinny font. It might be one of my favorites. So I'm just trimming down this white paper here, and I will make this into a banner. This is kind of a unifying theme that I'm doing on all of the pages. So I'm just cutting up the middle and then in from each edge. And that just creates that little banner, and it's going to go up in that top corner. And I decided I needed just a little bit more interest on there, so I'm going to pull that distress color back out and my little makeup brush here, and I'm just going to add that around the edges just to give it a little bit more dimension, and so it'll pop up off of that really busy background a little bit better. So as I mentioned today, we're studying in Daniel, and so there were several verses that were listed in the devotional, and off camera I went ahead and wrote out the verses and one of the quotes that was in the devotional that I wanted to include, and I have all the pieces here that I think I want to use, and I left this process in because this is as much part of what I do as everything else, and that is trying to figure out where to glue everything down, all the pieces that I think I may want to use. So sticking with these kind of pinks and blues, I'm just trying to find a way to get all of those pieces on here. So while I'm just moving all of those things around, I wanted to talk about the scriptures. There were several verses that were talking about Daniel from chapter 1 that was actually mentioned in the devotional, but I chose to use a different scripture, which is in the same chapter, but it's later. But it says that Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with the portion of the king's meat, nor with the wine which he drank. Therefore he requested of the prince of the eunuchs that he might not defile himself. This day's devotional is really talking about standing your ground in one way, and really and the things that Daniel did in that sense. And that was just part of, sometimes when we are faced with things, the time to make the decision is not when you're faced with a struggle. It's you make the decision before and you stay faithful, and that's one of the things that the devotional was really talking about. So you decide ahead of time, I'm not going to do this, or I'm going to believe in God's promises, so that when you're tested, you've already made that decision. And it just makes it easier. We tell our kids that all the time. So anyway, that is the scripture that I wanted to include, because Daniel was literally choosing to eat, the worst of the food instead of the best of the food, because he wanted to remain faithful. He did not want to defile himself because of his confidence in the Lord. And another quote that I wanted to include on this day was the quote by Oswald Chambers that says, "Faith by its very nature must be tried, and the real trial of faith is not that we find it difficult to trust God, but that God's character has to be clear in our minds so that we remain true to God whatever he may do." Sometimes we don't like his answers, and but we have to trust in his character enough that we believe he has our best interest at heart. So anyway, you can see I have finally settled on just using these pages as pockets, and I've glued a couple things down here, and I put those little sign with the feet, which I think is so cute, up there in the top left-hand corner. And anyway, that wraps up my page. If you liked this video, I'd appreciate it if you gave it a thumbs up. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. And until next time, bye-bye.